Hello everyone, it's Deb again. I thought I would talk about using livestock panel as trellis today, and there's some definite pros and cons to using that, and so that's what I thought I would talk about today. And this happens to be my green bean trellis and pea trellis, and this is one 16-foot livestock panel. And I think this one is 4 feet wide. Livestock panel you can get at the farm equipment store, and they come in various sizes and types. And this is actually one of the nicer, more expensive ones. This was the 4 foot wide, and I'm not quite sure. I think I may have paid $30 for this. And so actually it's 4 feet tall if you're talking about livestock fencing, which is what it's for. But in this case, it's 4 feet wide by 16 feet long. And what we did, well, to get it home in one piece, you almost have to certainly bend it anyways. And so we bent it in a arch shape, and we just kept it like that. And so I built these raised beds to go up around it. And the reason why the raised bed is centered on the trellis is because you can grow quite a few pea and bean plants up a trellis if you grow on both sides. And so if you look down here, there's one on the end, but I have a row of beans on this side and then a row of beans on this side. And so you can't really tell when they're all growing up, but there are seeds on both sides. And these bean plants are actually doing really well. They've climbed up all the way to the top and are coming out in some cases. And beans actually usually do just fine on their own. I haven't had to train them pretty much at all, and they've climbed it by themselves. Now peas and cucumbers and melons, you actually have to train a little bit to get them going, and I made a video about training cucumbers and melons up a trellis if you want to check that one out. But I just combined 3 different types of green bean plants or seeds, and just scattered the seeds, every 4 inches or so on each side, and I offset them so there would be room for all the roots and it wouldn't be too crowded and everything. And they seem to be doing pretty good. And this panel, actually, the holes on it are fairly even. Now on the other panels that I'll show you for my cucumbers and melons, some of the rungs are really close. On this one, it's not too bad. This one is a little bit smaller than the very end one, but it's not too bad. And like I said, the other ones are actually worse than that. You can get more expensive livestock panel that has the openings of it are exactly the same size throughout the whole panel. So it might be 4 inches by 4 inches, but every single hole on the panel will be 4 by 4, whereas this, I think, might be 4 inch by 6 inches, and then when you get down to here, it's like 3 inches by 6 inches, So it depends on your budget and what you have available as to what kind of livestock panel you can get. The ones that have the really close spacing on one end and the bigger spacing on the other end, those are like $20 cheaper than the ones that are evenly spaced all throughout. So if you're on a budget, you definitely want to look for the cheaper ones. Even though they're kind of a pain in the butt to work with, they're still usable and it works just fine. And so to anchor these into the ground, we pounded these poles down maybe 6 inches to a foot into the ground, and then we took the trellis and put it on the inside of the stakes, and right there where the holes are in that stake, I took a big black wire tie and tied it to the trellis itself, so it is not going anywhere. Plus now it's buried in these raised beds. So this particular trellis is very stable and very sturdy, and it will not go anywhere. And it'll probably be good for years and years because galvanized metal isn't supposed to rust. There might be a little rust where the ends are, but hopefully it will last for several years. And so that's how we staked it to the ground. And then at the end of the video, I'll show some pictures of how this looks laying flat on the ground, and also how we used it in some other raised beds that I had before I created these big raised beds over here. I had a couple other beds that I used the panel on. It was totally vertical, so you'll see the pictures. We attached it to some 4x4s, and that's how they went in there. And then this bed is cucumbers, and they're growing on the same type of trellis, the livestock panel. And what we did over here was to cut the pieces down to a certain length. The melon trellis is actually a little bit taller than the cucumber trellis, and I'm not sure, I could have probably done that the opposite way, because the cucumbers are already to the top of their trellis and the melons are not. Only one plant is to the top. But anyways, we just cut them to length and then formed them into a V, an upside down V, and took the pokey ends of it and just shoved it down into the dirt there, so you can see, because when you cut these, you'll have the pieces right in here that will be pokey out. It's hard to describe, but you know, once you get past a rung, when you cut another thing, you're going to have, like if you cut right there, you'll have that whole section that's free, and so that section, that pokey section, is what's sticking down into the dirt. And like I said, I made a video about training the cucumbers and the trellis in between these, but you can see that right here is the big section, and then gradually it gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and it's a little bit harder to train them in and out of these small holes. So for melons, you know, it might be best to get the bigger panels, but this is a 3-foot wide or 3-foot tall, no matter, or depending on how you look at it. And so we just turned it on its side, and now it's a 3-foot wide trellis, and by like 5.5 feet tall or something like that. And then right up here at the top, we just attached them with those big black wire ties so that they'll stay together. I still have to cut the tail off of that one, and I wanted to put some, we have one on each end, and I wanted to put one here in the center too, so I still need to do that maybe. For melons, actually, I've read somewhere that what you can do is, instead of trellising them up the livestock panel, you can take the livestock panel and lay it flat on the ground and put like cinder blocks underneath it, and so it would raise the panel up off the ground, and then they just laid the livestock panel right on the cinder blocks, and instead of growing up the trellis, they grow through the trellis and then on top of the trellis. And so what that does is provides that air space on the ground so that the melons aren't laying right on the dirt, and it keeps it more disease free and everything. So either way, whether you grow them on top of a trellis that's laying on some cinder blocks to raise it up, or whether you grow them actually up the trellis, it would be better than growing them on the ground, where, you know, it's harder to harvest that way, and it invites disease and everything because they're sitting right on the soil. And so this is a better option, definitely. And, you know, if I needed to, I could do that one trick where you just raise it up on the cinder blocks and lay it flat down, and it would just be a regular melon patch, except for it would be raised up off the ground a little bit. So these melons are actually a smaller variety, and that's how I can get away with growing them up a trellis. And in the next part, I'm going to have to make another part because I'm almost out of time, but in the next part I'll go over why I don't like these trellises so much, and hopefully you'll be able to judge whether this is something that you would like to use in your garden or not, because there are some cons to it. You know, it's not all great. So I will go over that in the next part. Thanks. Okay, so the reason I like using the livestock panel is it's cheap. And it's pretty versatile. You can use it in several different ways, and it's ready-made. You know, you don't have to put any kind of lattice work together or anything like that. It's already squared off, and you just cut it to the length you want it if you're going to cut it, and stick it into the ground and support it somehow. And so I do like it for its versatility and its ease of use. And it's also, you know, it's nice and smooth, so the plants don't have any problems growing tendrils around it. There's nothing for them to get hung up on, like splinters in the wood or anything like that. It's nice and smooth, and they seem to like it okay in that respect. And you can see that the tendrils, they'll just grab out or reach out and grab them very easily. And I mean, they grab each other too, but they will grab onto this livestock panel, and they'll climb around it pretty easily. So yeah, it's easy to work with, it's inexpensive, and you know, there's a few other good things for it that I'm sure you'll realize if you ever use it. But there are a few bad things that I don't really like, and so it may turn some people off. First and foremost is the size of it. It's so big that unless you have a truck to bring it home, it's really not going to be feasible for your garden. I mean, you could take the 16-foot panel and cut it in half if you know that you don't want to use it as an arch, as I did over there. You know, if you want to make more of an A-frame or whatever, you can cut it into smaller pieces right there at the farm store and stick them in your vehicle or whatever, as long as the vehicle is big enough, you know. So you can do it that way, but other than that, you really do need a truck to bring it home. So that's one limitation. And then the other thing I wanted to go over was the fact that it is metal. And when it's sitting out in the hot sun, and the sun is beating down really hard for hours and hours, your plants may not like it, especially in the beginning, before you have a canopy of shade going, because right now I have more of a canopy, and so the plants are actually shading the trellis and keeping it a little bit cooler. But when they were baby plants, they really didn't like it too much, and you can see on some of the leaves where there's actually sun scald, because the leaf would be laying on the trellis, and then it would just get so hot that there would be a burn line on the leaves. And I think you can probably still see this one on my cucumber. Yeah, this is not insect damage, it is sun scald, and originally there were no holes there. It was just a yellow line going all the way across, and I witnessed it, and I saw that it was laying on the bottom rung, and it got so hot and so sunny that it literally put a little burn crease on it, and so it's gradually just made holes there where that burn was. But that was definitely a burn mark versus just insect damage, which is what that is. Those are just holes, and that was literally a line from that trellis. And so, you know, especially if you live in, like, you know, Arizona or Florida or someplace that's really, really intensely hot and sunny, you know, if you live there, you may not want to use metal trellising, because that's definitely an issue. Now, if you are able to shade your trellising, like I've had to do here, because the plants, these cucumbers, are suffering from a lot of different things right now because the cucumber beetles have been getting to them. But they're also not very sun loving, you know, not as much as I thought that they would be. And so I actually have to shade the whole shebang with burlap just to keep the plants from wilting during the worst heat of sun of the day, because it's been really, really super hot, and so it hasn't liked it very much. So if you are gardening in really hot areas, you might want to consider planting under a tree, especially if you're doing peas and beans and delicate plants. And you know, if I could, I would grow probably grow my cucumbers over here because the tree provides just enough shade so that this trellis is not getting too hot. Now, I did have this trellis out front last year, and the plants didn't do very good, and that's because I get full sun out there. And so you should have felt this trellis. It was just so hot, and the plants were not liking it. So this is a much better place for my arch trellis, especially for the peas. And I put the peas on that side because it gets less sun than this side, and the green beans like more sun than the peas do. And so it worked out pretty well. And that tree provides a nice canopy, and it doesn't get too hot. It gets just enough sun. And so definitely you want to think about your location as to whether you can actually use this or not. And if you really want to use it and you're down in a sunny state, just try to put it under a tree or something where you can provide shade for it. Now, the alternative to doing this, of course, is to build a nice wood frame trellis, and it is definitely not going to get that hot. Also, if you used something like a PVC trellis, like John from Growing Your Greens, he grew his melons up a PVC trellising system, which he used a combination of PVC and netting, and it seemed to work out really well. And so that most definitely wouldn't get as hot as this metal trellising, but then of course you're going to spend a lot more money. And while the plants may be okay climbing up PVC, they might not want to grow up wood that is splintered or anything. So if you're going to use wood for a trellis, you probably want to make sure it's nice and smooth and that there aren't a bunch of splinters or anything. And you probably want to have, you want it to be sturdy and everything, but you want it to be small enough to where the plants aren't struggling to wind themselves around the trellis, because like I said, this is just perfect. The plants really like this, and they've just twined all the way up, and they don't have a problem with it at all. And it might have a problem if you've got old wood or anything like that to use as a trellis. So I think that was it. I just wanted to go over those subjects of why I like using this trellis and why I don't like using it. And like I said, you can use that information to apply it to your region and to your specific yard, whether you have shading or not, and the layout and everything else. And like I said, it's very versatile. You can use it in many different ways. You can lay it on the ground on top of cinder blocks. You can cut it into pieces and make A-frames. You can use just a flat wall of it, which I'll show in the picture at the very end of the video. And that's how we used it before. And so it's just a straight vertical wall. And on the other bed, I don't think I have a picture of it, so I'll have to describe it. There was a mound of dirt in place of one of those beds back there, and there was no borders. It was just dirt raised up on the ground. Well, it was good amended soil by the time I got done with it. And then over the top of the bed, we used just an old swing set frame, the A-frame that has the kids' swings hanging on it and stuff. And so on the back side of the swing set frame, I laid two pieces of panel going from, like if this was a swing set frame, the legs, it was extending from one to the other, and I wire tied it to the frame, and then on top of that one, because it was only a 3-foot piece, and the swing set frame was like 8 feet tall, so I set another piece on top of it, so it was two 3-foot pieces stacked on top of each other, and all wire tied to the poles of the swing set frame, like this one, so we just took the back side because that's the north side, so I didn't want to shade out the rest of the bed or anything. So, you can imagine this was a metal kitty swing set frame, and so we just laid it right up to it, and we had to trim off the edges because that frame, those frames actually angle in, so we actually did have to trim it so that there was no pokey pieces coming off the side or anything. So we trimmed it flush, and then we wire tied it right to the frame, and I grew cucumbers up that last year. And they didn't do that great because it was so hot and it was really sunny. And at that point I didn't have a lot of shade. I didn't have the burlap. I didn't have anything, and so it was kind of a loss that year, pretty much. It was sitting right here where this bed is. And so this year I'm hoping that if they survive the bacterial wilt and everything else from the cucumber beetles, I'm hoping that my cucumbers do a lot better this year. But things like melon and stuff, they don't really mind because they like the sun and they like the heat. And like I said, they might get a little bit sun-scalded in the very beginning, so you do have to watch it and be careful. But other than that, they're doing okay on this frame, and it's not too hot for them. But that's just because they're melons and they really love the heat. Okay? All right. I will talk to you guys another time. Thanks for watching.